I have to say to the good people of the Richmond, you elect great supervisors. It's been a pleasure serving with Connie. It was a pleasure serving with Sandra Lee Fewer before her, Eric Marr before that, and Jake McGoldrick, who I stay in touch with, who I was elected with in the year 2000. I want to thank the Planning Association of the Richmond. Rich, anytime you want to come swim with me in the Bay again, you are cordially invited to return. And Dave Heller and the Geary Boulevard Merchants Association and Neighborhoods United for putting tonight's panel together. I think it's very important that people throughout the city, this is I think the fourth one of these that I've attended, know what's going on. There is a dynamic that is playing out at City Hall, at the Planning Department, at the state legislature, where a lot of this is being done very quietly. There has been, I think, a concerted effort to de-democratize public participation in the process, and I think the best thing that we can do is arm people with information. So thank you for holding this town hall. Let me also start out at a high level by saying that a lot of this conversation is sadly very polarized, and what I think government and public discourse really should achieve is a real conversation for real people trying to compromise and achieve some ends. And this has been drowned out with a lot of noise. You're either a YIMBY, you're a NIMBY, pick a side, vilify the other side. You're pro-housing, you're anti-housing, where in reality that is making some very complex public policy incredibly simple. I think it was Lori who turned me on to the notion of, I think it was WIMBY, where in my backyard, and to that end, as somebody who has been involved as an elected official, but before I was an elected official as a neighborhood leader, I was the president of the neighborhood association that I see some of the members, Greg and others, the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. I was the president of that in the 1990s. So I have a long history in land use, and it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. As in the 25 years that I've been on the board, I have, with zeal and gusto, worked to rezone former naval lands at Treasure Island and the Hunters Point Shipyard. We rezoned the south of Market, which was historically a warehouse area where there were opportunities for residential and commercial development. So it's not as simple as you're pro-housing or anti-housing. But the name of the game historically is that local governments controlled land use in their municipalities, and that has changed markedly over the last number of years as the state legislature has preempted local governments in the 58 counties of the state of California, from the Mexican border to the Oregon border, and really taken away a lot of the democratically public participation driven land use government that we've had. And by the way, there's a narrative here, and there's always a kernel of truth in everything. There have been and there are communities in the state of California, I'm proud to say San Francisco is not one of them, that have used zoning to keep people out, to further racist policies. We have a history of redlining in urban America. San Francisco was not immune from that. And so we have to recognize that, but that has not been San Francisco's modern story. And I think a little bit of historical context is important for all of us to think about, dating back to lessons that hopefully we don't forget, but that if we don't watch out, we're likely to repeat. The lessons of redevelopment in the 1950s and 1960s that were racist policies that did uproot and tear communities like the Fillmore asunder. Things that happened in the 1970s, like the wholesale mass evictions at the I Hotel that led to the demise of Manila Town. The freeway revolt, where the entire Embarcadero was going to be separated from the rest of San Francisco by a double-deck freeway, where the Panhandle and Golden Gate Park were going to be a major freeway through San Francisco. San Franciscans revolted against that. In some cases, we stopped those mistakes. In other cases, we have spent decades fixing those mistakes. That's why we have certificates of preference for people who were actually evicted in the A1 and A2 redevelopment areas. Those certificates of preference still exist today. So I think that when you simplify things and just say you're YIMBY or NIMBY, that is a disservice to all of us and does not really engender the kind of dialogue that we should be having. I agree with Supervisor Chan. There is a need for housing, more housing in San Francisco, but let me say this. Housing that sells at $1,200 a square foot, luxury housing, isn't the kind of housing that we need. Somebody appeared in front of the Land Use Committee as we were dealing with density legislation, and there's a slew of legislation that is coming our way, much of it at the behest of Mayor Breed, where a member of the public, Calvin Welsh, stood up and reminded us that the two densest cities in America, New York City and San Francisco, are actually the most expensive cities in America. So it's not as simple as saying, if you build high-rise towers, all lives matter and everything will get cheaper. It's a lot more complicated than that. And government has a role to play, and I fundamentally think we do have an affordable housing crisis in San Francisco. The stories I hear of parents who cannot have their children own a house in San Francisco, renters who have been evicted by Ellis Act evictions that we cannot control locally because that was the original state preemption. I know people who have been evicted 3 and 4 times in San Francisco. Why? Because if you can get them out, you can rent the place for more money. And for those people who enjoy the benefits of rent control, that is allowing people to age in place, raise their families, and have a decent living in San Francisco. San Francisco has pioneered so many innovative policies around rent control, around eviction protections, around insisting that market rate developers contribute to the supply of affordable housing. And so but now let's talk about state preemption. We have historically, under state law, been required to do a housing element of our general plan. But in recent years, not only has the state added teeth and made us actually, well, they can't make us implement the things in there because this is a market-driven economy. The city and county of San Francisco does not build houses. Developers and people build houses. We can create the conditions for that through zoning. But we have now been told that we have to build, entitle 82,000 units in the next 8 years. Now, to put this in perspective, since World War II to the current date, San Francisco has approved about 2,000 to 3,000, built about 2,000 to 3,000 units per year. In the last 2 decades, by the way, we have net gained 51,000 units of housing. There are 70,000 units of approved housing in the pipeline, which aren't being built because Arron Peskin is anti-housing or Connie Chan is anti-housing. They're not being built because interest rates are high, construction costs are high, and guess what? They can't sell them for what they want to sell them at to make the profit that they want to make, to get the return on investment that they need to have. So there's 70,000 units in the pipeline, but we're supposed to build 82,000 units by 2031, 46,500 and some odd affordable at moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income affordability rates. Well, San Francisco, and I'll say this very clearly, the YIMBYs think that the rising tide is going to raise all boats. But we know from our last, what we call RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, that we overproduced luxury housing because San Francisco, doom loop narrative notwithstanding, is still a wonderful and beautiful place and people want to come here, and some people have places in London and New York and San Francisco. We overproduce luxury housing to the tune of 150%, but underproduce in all of the other affordability categories. So, meanwhile, under the housing element, under the planning regime that we are under all of this state preemption, we have adopted a number of things that you may or may not be aware of. There's no more single-family zoning in San Francisco. We got rid of it. You can build 4-plexes and 6-plexes all over the western side of San Francisco. We lowered the inclusionary rates, the amount of required on-site affordable housing that market rate developers are required to build, because in this economic environment, it wasn't economically feasible. We've been doing all of those things. They're responsible things. I believe in those things. But that's not enough. Now we have to upzone swaths of the city. But there's no plan for affordability. The planning department says that will come. There's no plan that people like Woody LaBounty, who used to work on the Western Neighborhoods Project, who is now the executive director of San Francisco Heritage, San Francisco's preeminent historic preservation organization. There's no plan for saving the best of the rest, which buildings, which areas deserve historic protections. There's no plan for that. That will come later. I believe that if all of you get involved, that we can actually bring the political pressure to bear to say we're not going to piecemeal this. We want to have a comprehensive plan. This is a city that has had great planning directors. Alan Jacobs, who made sure that Chinatown would not become downtown, that the archipelago of wonderful historic neighborhoods that I represent, like Jackson Square and North Beach, would continue to survive and thrive and be the envy of the world. We are capable of doing that, but right now, because of this polarized discussion, because of the preemption that is happening in Sacramento, and I always say, follow the money. Follow the money. I'm being paid to be here tonight. Rich Correa isn't. David Heller isn't. Lori Brooks isn't. Many of the people that we see come testify at City Hall are being paid. This is a movement that is being paid by the development industry. And they're being very, very successful. And they are squelching a conversation that we are all capable of having, that I really invite you to become a part of. If that doesn't happen, we are not going to recognize this city, and we are going to repeat the mistakes that we made in redevelopment, where we tore families apart, where we destroyed historic buildings, and we have neighborhoods that still have not recovered. We will repeat the mistakes that we made in the I Hotel when we evicted people en masse. By the way, those terrible events led to sea changes in our laws. The reason we have Chapter 37 of the Administrative Code that makes it so difficult to evict people is because of those things. The reason that we have Article 10 of the Planning Code that allows for the creation of historic districts and the landmarking of individual sites is because of those terrible days. That was the beginning. That created the Victorian Alliance. That created the seminal book that Mrs. G. Bland Platt made, Here Today, Gone Tomorrow. So I invite you to become a part of that conversation. You are going to hear, and I want to thank the panelists here for their expertise and their perspectives, and I will turn it over to Rich Correa. Commander, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Supervisor Peskin. You know, I didn't acknowledge David Heller and Sean Kim. They're co-presidents of the Greater Geary Boulevard Merchants and Property Owners Association. Sean runs Joe's Ice Cream, and David runs the Beauty Network, both places that would evaporate under the plan that I looked at of these upzoning of Geary Boulevard. But
there's just one other thing I want to say. The only other thing I want to say is California and San Francisco have a legacy of protecting our connection to the ocean and to the bay. That was expressed by the people of the state of California 52 years ago when, against all odds, the Coastal Act was passed by the people, Proposition 20. And there is now an effort in this city by our state senator to gut the Coastal Act. This is what Supervisor Chan was referring to. Along the Great Highway in the outer Richmond and in the outer Sunset, it is profoundly dangerous to have the Coastal Commission's jurisdiction taken off of, by the way, an infinitesimally small stretch of San Francisco land. It only goes back The deepest it goes is to 45th Avenue. It's mostly just a block back from the Great Highway, but that is the beginning of building a set of Fontana towers along the Great Highway, and we cannot let that happen. So our charter, which is the Constitution of San Francisco, confers extraordinary powers on the Chief Executive Officer. Chief Executive Officer, also known as the mayor, is the appointing authority of the department head. So if we're talking about an issue like this, the director of the Department of Planning is an appointee of the mayor. The majority of every commission, actually most commissions, are appointed entirely by the mayor. There are a handful of commissions where the Board of Supervisors appoints a minority of the members of that commission and the mayor appoints the majority. So the Planning Commission, 4 appointed by the mayor, 3 appointed by the Board of Supervisors. The mayor controls that commission. But the mayor also has outsized powers in Sacramento. So in many ways, like the President of the United States, who is the communicator and broker with other countries, that is what the charter confers upon the mayor in the local context. And so it is the mayor who, in the case of Senate Bill 951, it is the mayor of the city and county of San Francisco who is the sponsor of that bill. It's not the city and county of San Francisco. It's not the Board of Supervisors of the city and county of San Francisco. It is the mayor who is the sponsor of Senator Wiener's bill. Every bill in the state legislature has a sponsor. It can be an organization, it can be an individual, it can be an elected official. But to sum it up, Rich, the mayor has extraordinary powers under our system of government. This is not a strong mayor system of government. This is a super strong mayor system of government. And by the way, we used to have a strong mayor system of government with a strong city administrator. But in 1995, the voters of San Francisco passed a comprehensive reform of our charter, and that basically made the city administrator a vestigial remnant relative to power and concentrated that power in the mayor's office, which were used extraordinarily by Willie Brown for good and otherwise. But to answer your question, the only way you change these things is by changing your mayor. So if I may, to Barry Hermanson's question, the notion of what we call value capture, being able to, for the benefit of society, in this case affordable housing, take some of, when you upzone something, you're increasing value. And to the extent that we can capture some of that value, that's what inclusionary housing is, we want to do that. This administration is not big on value capture. And remember that the composition of the Board of Supervisors is such that Connie and I need 8 of our members in order to overcome a veto. So that resolution on Senate Bill 951 that the board passed, we passed by an 8-3 vote. When we dealt with the density bonus on the northern waterfront in the C2 zoning district, if I ended up with 7 votes, the mayor would have vetoed that. Thank God we ended up with an 8-3 vote. Actually, we don't even know if the mayor could still veto it. She has 10 days from today to actually veto that or not. But this is not an administration that is big on value capture or developers paying their way.
But is it possible at a city level, is something not scared?
Well, let me go back to what Lori said, which is this entire scheme has set us up to fail. We can do, there are many ways that, including, thank you all for the $300 million bond, state subventions, federal subventions, various, financing schemes, leveraging other dollars, but that's not going to get us to $19 billion. And even with value capture, it's not going to get us to $19 billion. So ultimately, hitting 46,500 and whatever it is units between now and 2031 on the affordable side, good luck.
I honestly don't know. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, and by the way, nor do I know what
where the Democratic Party of San Francisco stands on this issue. I think it's fundamentally a neighborhood. San Francisco neighborhoods have had a modicum of control over their destinies, which is not to say that they haven't grown. I think this kind of transcends party politics, but I don't think either party, to my knowledge, has a position.
Right.
So the question was, I think really, if I can restate it slightly, which is, are there opportunities for creating housing in vacant spaces in our beleaguered downtown? Commercial spaces. And the answer is, I think so. I am the author that passed with Supervisor Chan, actually unanimously passed, to smooth the way for adaptive reuse from vacant office, vacant commercial to residential in the downtown core. But let me not oversell that. You are not going to see massive amounts of conversions of 40-story vacant office buildings that have 25,000 square foot floor plates because they do not lend themselves well to conversion. The smaller building typologies, many of them historic, they're smaller in nature, they have smaller floor plates, which means that you have more access to windows, they tend to have operable windows, do lend themselves to adaptive reuse from commercial to residential. I think we'll see several thousands of those at the right price points. So if you bought that as an investor at the top of the market for $1,500 a square foot, it is never going to pencil. You're never going to, do the plumbing runs. You're never going to have a return on investment that works. But if you were the family trust that bought it for $200 a square foot in 1975, that might be a good option for you today.
I think that we can grow the city without destroying the city. We all see the city from where we live it. I live it in North Beach, where it's 3 units a lot or denser. There are other parts of the city. There's some parts of the city where houses don't touch. So we all come from where we live. But the steps that I was a little ahead of my time. In 2003, and many of you may have opposed it. I'm not pointing fingers at you. I proposed having widespread accessory dwelling unit legalization in San Francisco. It lost at that Board of Supervisors on 6-5 vote. Jake McGoldrick was on the other side of me. His constituents didn't want it. It is now the law of the land. It's predicted, again, we live in a free market and people do them, but it's predicted to build 33,000 units over time. The notion that what we said, which is we've gotten rid of single-family zoning in San Francisco. There is no such thing as single-family zoning in San Francisco. We passed for the west side of San Francisco, the least dense part of the city, 4 units per lot in most of the west side of San Francisco. So we've taken those steps. Now that doesn't mean that you snap your fingers, and we've also done it in a way that says we're not kicking you out of your house. If you rent-controlled units, we're not making it anymore because the state of California has not allowed us to extend rent control to buildings built after 1979. So there's a premium on those units, and you can't evict a rent-controlled tenant in order to do that. And we have also been pressing, there's an exception to the Costa-Hawkins Act that actually allows post-1979 rent-controlled units by contract. So we've actually been saying in instances where we have been granting upzonings, this is the case in the fourplex legislation, this is the case in the ADU legislation, we will liberalize our zoning laws, but in exchange, developer, you have to subject that unit to rent control by contract, which developers have been doing. The big controversy that we had at the Board of Supervisors the day before yesterday was the mayor was actually opposing the imposition of rent control in upzone projects, in increased density projects, which is a departure from the public policy that we've been pursuing in this town for the last 20 years.
Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure, thank you all. This is a great presentation. I want to make sure I understand the specter of enforcement here. There are 538 municipalities in California that are subject to the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. In the last study, only 29 were fully compliant. I understand about the forced development, the builder's remedy in Santa Monica. Is this evenly enforced throughout the state?
No, it's not.
I do not know the answer to that, but I can tell you
I have made minor amendments to pieces of legislation and been told that I cannot do that. If I get 8 votes, 10 votes, 11 votes, I cannot do that without the review and approval of HCD. I've been a member of the Board of Supervisors for most of the last 25 years. You elect me, I go there and do my thing. If you don't like me, don't vote for me again. I can't do that anymore. They are breathing down our necks. But I don't know how they're doing it in other municipalities.
Is there a method to dispute selective enforcement?
No, as a matter of fact, interestingly enough, there is a provision in one of these bills that actually allows them to interpret their own laws. They are the judge, the jury, and the executioner. And there's no due process. I mean, it's Kafkaesque. It's pretty bizarre. The housing, the HCD, the Housing and Community Development Agency of the state of California.